Welcome to another episode of See Jane Lead. Today we're talking about the idea of diversity, and more specifically about the idea of the danger of only viewing things through a single story. So on my screen, I hope you can see it, there is a graphic that I made for a creativity class that was intended to represent the full spectrum of ideas that a person or people could have. So if you'll take a look at that rainbow spectrum on the right hand side of the graphic, if you can imagine just one point from the middle to the outside and one line going through the circumference of that circle, that is really representative of one perspective. Each and every person has a different perspective and worldview that they translate the world through, and those worldviews include your background, your experiences, your belief system, your philosophies. It could be all kinds of things. Some suggest there are genetic components. Long story short, everybody's worldview is different, and they are scattered very far across the spectrum based on all these different factors and what's important to each one of us individually. So this single story concept describes the idea of the danger of only looking at one of these perspectives. And I have a couple of stories to illustrate this, and then I want to talk about the danger of really not identifying these perspectives when we only look at common ground. So the first story is about how I was viewed through a single spectrum. For a time, I lived in the state of Utah. I was there because of a job transfer in my family. I got a job with a very large wireless company, and I started a career there in management. And then eventually I transferred to the California office about 3 years later. And when I got there, I was known as that manager who transferred from Utah. And because I had transferred from Utah, a lot of people assumed that I was very, very conservative, that I had a lot of values that are very popular in the community in Utah that aren't necessarily in effect for me. So for one example, I was not invited to the manager's happy hour because they assumed I would be offended by alcohol. But I'm not offended by alcohol. This was something that was manufactured by the single story. And that translates into my next story. And that is a situation that I had with an employee where I failed to see her single story. So this employee had applied for a job and had asked for feedback on why she didn't get the job, why another employee was selected instead of her. And the other employee just was more prepared and had a better performance in the interview and had participated in a mock job immersion and just was a stronger candidate overall. And one thing that was mentioned also was that she had more experience doing this type of work, and the employee who had asked for the feedback said, well, what can I do to learn more about this, or how can I get more experience? And I launched into a discussion about our tuition assistance program and the great benefits it gives you. And this particular employee was looking for a role in the legal department. I recommended that she could study law and the workplace would pay for it. And, I said something at the end of the interview to the effect of, education is like something that everybody, should do for themselves. And that was where I failed to see her perspective. A few days later, I found out she was very, very upset that she felt I had suggested she was undereducated, and that because she wasn't interested in pursuing an education, I wouldn't consider her for a job. But culturally in her family, women didn't attend college, and that wasn't so like she was going to do or was interested in doing, and felt that it shouldn't hold her back since the job didn't require college. Well, um, that really surprised me, and it made me feel like, okay, I really need to be more cautious of what I say so it can't be misconstrued. But on the other hand, I need to understand where people are coming from before I give that type of advice. So that feeds into one last thought, and that is, of course, it's important to understand all these perspectives. And one thing I think we tend to do as leaders is focus simply on the common ground that is safe for us to discuss with others. One example of that is I was giving I was giving a behavioral warning one time to this individual, and he he felt like we weren't seeing eye to eye. He told me, I'm a 46-year-old gay black man, and what you say doesn't matter to me. And I said, okay, well, I'm a 26-year-old female bisexual woman, and while we may come from different backgrounds and have different experiences, what we do have in common is that we are both employees of the company, and we have to abide by the rules of conduct that are in place for our employees, which include respect. He had been threatening his coworker, and that's why he had that warning. So I focused on the common ground very professionally, but it sounded like he was trying to tell me more of his perspective. And I think that we go a lot to the politically correct side, where we are very, very cautious about talking about perspectives. But I want to highlight that it is important to understand the values of your organization in order to make sure that you're representing them accurately. And that concludes today's episode of See Jane Lead.